The very first major area in Shadow Hearts From the New World sees you stabbing street thugs to death at an abandoned theatre in 1920s New York as a private detective investigating a missing persons case. JRPGs have many settings, but most lean towards fantasy lands of some description, swords and magic and so on. So Shadow Hearts' unique alt history setting, neither contemporary nor ancient, makes a striking impression among its peers even within the first few minutes of play. Upon reaching the end of this area, a monstrosity straight out of the Cthulhu mythos kills the person you were looking for in front of you and serves as the first boss. It was in this moment that I knew I was in for a good time. There's just nothing quite like it. So with the tone set, let me back up and establish a little context. Shadow Hearts is a series of PlayStation 2 JRPGs with a gothic horror theme set in an alternate history of our real world, around the 1910s and 20s. From the New World is the third and final game in this series, technically fourth, since the series' true origin point is actually PS1 game Delka, which is fantastic for its own reasons, but I'll digress on that for now. You see, these three games all follow on from one another in a linear fashion, while From the New World, initially conceived as a spin-off, is set in a new location with a new main character, and while it shares the world building of the series up to now, it isn't critical to have played the other three to follow along. That's part of why I'm choosing to cover it in specific here, partly because it's just the last one I played, so it's the freshest in my mind, but also because I don't want to have to summarize 3 long JRPGs for you here. In fact, I won't have to summarize much plot at all, because as we shall see, From the New World barely has one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This video won't contain a massive amount of story analysis, and what few twists there are I will conceal for the benefit of anyone who wants to play it. I made this video more so to shoot the shit about its mechanical design, but I will be using footage from various areas of the game and its predecessors and talking about some of the plot, so nevertheless I will issue a light spoiler warning here for all the Shadow Hearts games if you're going to check these out for yourself. Okay, on with the video. We take on the role of 16-year-old Johnny Garland, a completely normal American boy who, following a car accident that claimed the lives of his entire family, wakes up with most of his memories gone and decides the best way to go about recovering it is to LARP as a private detective in New York. He is eventually pulled into the strange happenings that have resulted in horrific monsters manifesting over the Americas. He is very quickly joined on this journey by Native Americans Shania and Natan, the former who can transform into various demons herself over the course of the game, as is tradition for the series, and the latter who, contrasting his largely taciturn personality, fights by bombastically dual-wielding handguns using what the game calls gun-fu techniques. This all hits the field pretty rapidly on starting the game. One of the very first things you'll come to notice is how quickly New World asserts its tone. It's this totally unique blend of surreal comedy and cosmic horror where you can be pulled into a situation where you're tasked to break the actual real Al Capone out of prison, eventually becoming best buddies with the guy like some kind of absurd fanfiction. Is it fanfiction if it's about real people? But all the while you'll be fighting abominations beyond the comprehension of man, and the party will just brush this off with a smile. The first half of New World is a delightful rollercoaster of ridiculous scenarios as it introduces the main cast, who mainly all have extremely tenuous to borderline non-existent reasons for joining Johnny on his journey. Like for instance Hilda, who is a self-proclaimed magical girl who is also a vampire. This is just what the party members in this game are like. Her reason for going on this dangerous expedition is simply that she views it as a sightseeing tour. In other words, she has no reason. They couldn't be asked to come up with one. This isn't a game that has a lot in the way of individual character arcs with complex or interesting motivations. It focuses more on being funny in the moment, and for what it's worth, it is good at that. It's a game that's funny on purpose. It has a good sense of comedic timing in its cutscenes, and it's propped up by solid English voice direction that delivers some good laughs over the course of the game. This is the most overtly comedic game in the series, with the origin point Delka being honestly quite a somber little game. In fact, this series has an almost totally linear progression where they get gradually sillier as they go, with Shadow Hearts 1 and 2 starring Yuri Hyuga, a man who talks like someone who would definitely have a something awful account. He's the kind of character who will say what to him is the coolest thing he could possibly say at any given moment, but he's only right about that 50% of the time, with the other 50% of the time giving birth to the new dumbest thing anyone has said up to that point. Still, he's a very likable and charming protagonist with emotional complexity of his own and a fitting protagonist for the series. Johnny, meanwhile, serves more the role of the straight man of the group in From the New World, in more ways than one. And there is something enjoyable about how his initial exasperation at the stupidity field that he exudes that constantly causes the most ridiculous things to happen around him constantly, eventually gives way to a refreshing, fuck it, we ball kind of attitude that ultimately makes him likable as the protagonist of this extremely unserious video game. I wouldn't say he undergoes a lot of growth over the game, especially compared to Yuri, whose games are principally about his growth as a person. He's not one of RPG's all-time great leads, but for the game he's in, I think he's neat. We like Johnny here. It's when the game gets to its second half and it starts trying to raise the stakes and actually be a serious story that the cracks start to show and the story largely collapses, since it hasn't really taken the time to establish any relevant character motivations or intrigue. With New World having a laughably boring cast of villains who spend literally a third of the game waiting for their Uber, it becomes a comedy routine of its own, but this time it feels like this one is funny by accident. You spend around 8 hours of various story beats playing out among the protagonists, and every so often you get an interlude of these three goobers waiting in front of this door. There's probably half a dozen scenes of this, and it starts to become funny in of itself how much of the plot they spend just waiting here while none of them seem to be sure what to do with themselves. Especially due to the extremely bizarre decision to make the main villain never ever utter a single word over the entire game, making her the most boring of them all, but also leaving her villain buddies unsure of what it is she even thinks she's doing that they're trying to assist with until the very end of the game. This is the stuff that's funny, but in a bad way. What kind of game has a cast of villains where they don't even know what it is they're trying to accomplish? So, story with gripping intrigue? Not from the New World's strong suit. The game is at its best when it's being goofy and surreal, which fortunately, it often is. And even when it's not, I was still having a good time thanks to its extremely enjoyable combat and bevy of side content. Let me tell you about the judgement ring system. So in combat, you have your usual JRPG setup: attack, magic, item, etc. If you're watching this, I'm going to make the bold assumption you've played a JRPG before and don't need me to re-explain the fundamentals, because all of those work pretty much as you'd expect. They haven't reinvented the wheel entirely here. But they have invented the ring, because every time you want to take an action, the judgment ring pops up, and your success or failure at that action is determined by how well you can time a button press to match the orange hit areas as the line spins around the ring. There's also much smaller red areas on the ring called the strike zone, and hitting within this narrower window will grant you bonus power to whatever you're doing. And it can be anything. When I say the judgment ring is used for everything, I mean everything. Basic attacks, judgment ring. Magic, judgment ring. Healing, also ring. Using a normal item? Ring time, gamers! The game tempts you at every turn to add a little oomph to your actions, and often a little extra is worth the hassle. The caveat, of course, is that if you miss the area entirely, your turn is forfeit. So how confident do you feel? It sounds like a simple risk-reward system, and indeed in the very first game it is, serving to add a little spice to the combat, but not really elevating it from the pack of similar RPGs of the time. Shadow Hearts 1 is good, don't get me wrong, but it is easily the plainest game in the series. It's only in Covenant, the second game, where it expands massively and really feels like it's become the combat system rather than a novel gimmick. You can equip different types of rings with their own risk and reward dynamics, upgrade the rings to have wider hit areas or multiple hit zones to do multiple attacks at the cost of each zone being individually smaller, which can have interesting implications for your playstyle purely based on your quirks. For example, I was holding back on actively using my hit area upgrades because I found it easier if I used them not to make the area as wide as possible, but to make the areas as evenly spaced as possible, because I found it easier to hit perfectly if the rhythm was even compared to something more clustered. That's a very personal choice. There's nothing that specifically incentivizes you to play that way, but the fact the system allows you to express yourself that way is fun. This can influence things as far down as your party composition too, as every character has a different ring to work with different hit areas, and you may find some characters easier than others. I know I did. From the New World maintains all of this combat system expansion and adds another mechanic that really improves on its predecessor and makes every battle interesting: the stock system. Stock is a meter that every individual character fills as the fight goes on, as they deal or take damage. Up to a maximum of 2 stock can be held at once per character. 1 stock can be expended to do a double attack, which as the name implies, lets a character do 2 actions in 1 turn. Crucially, it doesn't let you do the same action twice. They have to be 2 different things, so you can't just attack twice. You can use 2 items or spells that do very similar things, but it can't literally be the same move twice. Obviously, this is a very powerful technique, as being able to suddenly output twice the damage can really turn the tides in your favour, or get your setup online faster in a tough boss by being able to attack and buff in the same turn. But it has to be used carefully, because besides the stock and MP costs, the ensuing turn delay will be as if you executed those 2 moves at once, so if you do 2 huge high delay nuke magic moves in 1 turn, that next character's turn will disappear far off into the turn order, never to be seen again. So using this mechanic thoughtlessly will simply grant the enemy a massive opportunity to counter without you being able to respond. Going crazy with it and having your entire party execute doubles one after another is usually not a great idea unless things are looking real grim and you're trying to pull a Hail Mary to get out of a fight. But even if you do send your next character's turn into the Shadow Realm, something that's fortunately very easy to keep track of thanks to a very clean UI that makes it obvious what effects your choices are going to have on the turn order, praise be, because none of this would work if you didn't have good info to base your decisions off of, I say, side-eyeing the handful of bosses in this game that do just blatantly lie about their turn order with contempt. There is still a way to pull them out of the hole, or to simply take your turn a little faster and with more oomph via the other thing stocks can give you, a combo attack. Like doubles, this costs one stock to execute and allows another character to immediately take a turn, and you can chain multiple of these together as long as everyone involved in the combo has a bar of meter to continue it. Albeit, you can't have the same member participate in a combo twice. The appeal of combos is that firstly you can jump the queue and take your turn immediately, but also combos scale proportional to how many hits you've landed in said combo. So particularly long combos executed on bosses can deal incredible amounts of damage if you've got the resources to invest. But again, it can't be used thoughtlessly, since while it jumps you ahead in the turn queue, it doesn't erase it. You'll be set back by the amount you jumped forward, plus whatever move you did. So it's best used for eliminating enemies entirely before they can get a move, or situations where you really just need a turn right now to heal or finish off an enemy. And of course, you can combine double and combo in one go and have a character take 2 moves and pass the combo to another character, allowing you to craft devastating sequences if you're willing to blow all your resources in one go. It's a really fun system where you can mix and match doubles and combos in whatever way best suits the moment, and it's not just boss fights where this system is interesting. You might think it only comes up in longer fights because JRPGs often have a problem where you save your tertiary super meter type resource like a limit break for boss fights and otherwise never use it, but New World smartly encourages you to use the fun options even during regular battles via a few key decisions. Firstly, you can only stock 2 bars of meter on any given character, and that's not a very high total amount. It doesn't take much time to build up, so there's not a lot of incentive to hold back in case you need it later. A game is more fun when you actually get to use the cool abilities and engage with the systems, and New World understands this very well. In fact, you gain bonuses from fights for meeting conditions like never allowing the enemy to take a turn or never missing a ring, and sometimes the bonus is just extra stock meter, so if you're willing to use it, you'll often earn it right back. The second way it encourages this is something I've buried the lead on, which is that enemies also have access to this system, and they can and absolutely will double and combo attack you if you give them the chance. Add to this the general balance of New World where there isn't really any way to specifically tank damage and hard-hitting enemies, and this can very quickly put you in a bad position if you get inattentive, which prevents even the regular random encounters from becoming stale. There's not often a moment, bar revisiting early areas much later in the game, where I felt like I could just mash through combat without repercussion. As an enemy, and especially a boss, getting to execute a double on you can very easily take a party member out of commission in an instant. Now, don't take this to mean that New World is a hard game, because it's not. I wouldn't say it's one of the harder RPGs I've played. It's pretty generous with save points, its dungeons aren't especially winding or large, so they don't demand a huge amount of your ability to manage resources to make it to the end. But it is definitely a game that punishes inattentiveness in its fights. I never actually full-on game over to anything but a couple of select boss fights, usually the ones that lie about the turn order. Seriously, I hate these so much. There's only like 4 in the game and they're all assholes. But I definitely had some near misses across my playthrough. But you have answers. There are ways to preempt enemy stock usage. There's a class of physical attack called a hard hit, which consumes half a bar of stock meter itself, but deletes a full bar from the opponent. Some kinds of magic also have this property, but since New World's combat is all about the interesting choices, a notable property is that hard hit moves will end a combo in progress. You can combo into a hard hit, but you cannot combo out of it. A decision has to be made about whether or not you want to continue a combo or take an enemy's stock. Important decision too, since enemy stock usage can be very devastating. This already is a system that's very fun to play with, and the game loves to encourage you to explore this system with encounters that complement it. Sometimes it'll cluster enemies together, allowing you to take out packs with AoE. Since magic have AoE effects, but it's kind of limited as part of the strategy since you don't have a massive amount of influence over where you or the enemy are going to be in relation to each other. It kind of functions like the modern Yakuza RPGs in that regard. It's a nice bonus when you can have it, but sometimes it'll ask you to take on 2 big lads spaced too far apart for AoEs to be functional, and it becomes a game of juggling plates as you try to focus fire one of them down, but you can't leave the other completely unchecked or they build meter and rip your face off with a double or combo. It's all good stuff, but it gains that extra bit of tactility and cool factor from how move properties interact with everything. Moves have 3 specific attacking ranges, high, mid, or low, like a fighting game. This entire combat system feels very fighting game inspired in general, what with the meter management and everything, but this part feels especially fighting game-esque. A magic spell might cause a rock pillar to emerge from the ground, knocking an enemy airborne where they can be hit by a high attack, but anything that hits low will just whiff entirely and you drop the combo. There's a clear visual indicator for this on every move in terms of how it will impact the enemy and whether or not it will land given an enemy's current position, which is a problem the previous game had where the locational system wasn't implemented but still kind of existed but barely mattered. 95% of everything you did would combo into everything else with no issue, but those rare 5% of times you just randomly drop a combo because of weird animation jank from a funny shaped enemy near a wall or something. And that always managed to frustrate me, even though it is admittedly extremely on brand for something mimicking a fighting game. The system has been made stricter in New World, where lots of attacks definitely can't combo into each other at all now, but also fairer, since you always have the information necessary to figure that out, eliminating that frustrating 5% of times from the system where you just drop a combo for no reason and waste a turn. And since nothing is without further-reaching implications in this game, this ties into what magic you equip each character with, since it's not as simple as just equipping everyone with the strongest magic possible, since different tiers of the same elemental spell can have different attack ranges, so it becomes important to distribute things across the party in a way that doesn't leave one of them without good options for particular attack heights. Which in of itself makes it hard for one character to dominate your playthrough, since it's all but impossible to equip one character with an answer for every situation given the restrictions both elements and height put on magic loadouts. It forces you to consider how your party works together as a team, as suits the genre, naturally. Every character does, however, bring their own individual quirks to the battle, like Shania confused with spirits to take on alternate forms and gain new movesets, which is a traditional mechanic to this series. In previous games, Yuri was dubbed a Harmonixer, and confused with demons, and there were a lot of these demons with very cool designs, but realistically you only ever actually used about 3 or 4 of them. New World streamlines this by only giving Shania 4 fusions total, and while it's a shame to lose the lovely character designs the series is so strong in, seriously, look at these enemies, they're great. It was probably a good choice for the gameplay, since each of Shania's forms has clear strengths and weaknesses, and you'll likely actually use all of them during a playthrough rather than having a dozen forms collecting dust in the menu. Every character has their own little side quest to power up their unique ability, whatever it may be. Like Frank, the American ninja, powers up his ninja arts through the completion of little ninja missions he is given, like procuring a nuclear warhead stored in Area 51. This is an early game quest, it's not even mandatory, this is just what From the New World is like. One of the side quests is just completing a quiz in Rio de Janeiro in exchange for goodies. It really is like Yakuza. These side quests don't exactly flesh out the world or anything, but New World is largely at its best when it's being funny, and these side quests pull you into comedic situations and are worth pursuing for the new abilities you gain as a result. My favourite character side quest was probably the one involving Mao, the drunken fist kung fu master who is also a mobster and a cat. She harbors a desire to be a movie star, so her side quest is a series of 1v1 fights throughout the filming of a kung fu movie, where you fight against fitting kung fu movie villains like the Terminator. Sure, why not? Incidentally, them being a cat is a thing that nobody in the setting bar Johnny seems remotely bothered by. The side quests allows New World to continue putting its best comedic foot forward, and its combat only gets better when you have more options to play with, so indulging the extracurriculars to gain new abilities is something I usually wanted to do, rather than something I felt like I had to do to get strong enough for the main story. Because they're bright spots and they make the game's core combat even stronger, which is why it breaks me a little heart that this game locks the most difficult optional dungeon and super boss behind functionally 100% completion, in a game with a fair amount of missable enemies and one-time areas. It sucks because I enjoy this game's systems enough that I totally would have liked to try and fight the super boss, but you basically need to play the entire game with a strategy guide spread across your thighs to make sure you can get to it, and that blows and isn't really how I like to play RPGs. New World's got a bit of an issue with how it distributes the side quests in general. I know this is a classically styled JRPG, so I'm not expecting quest indicators or anything, but it really does expect you to just randomly comb the entire game world and re-talk to every NPC at various unmarked intervals to activate them. So you either buy a strategy guide or back-end your playthrough, because for some reason a huge number of the side quests only activate once you've set foot in the final dungeon and then decide to walk back out. A thing you have no real reason to actually do, but it's the easiest way to be sure that you won't have to recheck everything for a later story flag, since there are no later story flags at that point. Every single game in the series does this, and it's a very peculiar choice. Fortunately, New World has no side quests that become actively unavailable with time, but it does mean the game kinda struggles to dole these out at a reasonable pace. You either waste a lot of time traipsing around the entire world for new side quests whenever it feels like there might be one, or you put the main plot completely on hold for 20 hours right before the finale to go hunt Bigfoot. One of the many side activities available here. It's a bit of a pain, but ultimately I still found it worth it. I think it says a lot about the strength of its core combat and sense of humor that for a game where I don't have a lot of value to say about the actual main plot, that I still enjoyed it for its roughly 30-hour runtime. Which puts it on the trimmer end for a PlayStation 2 JRPG, and that's probably a good thing since New World is at its worst tone-wise in the back third when the funny train largely starts to run out of steam. But in exchange, that's when the combat is at its most complex and enjoyable, and the game knows this because it unlocks a whole litany of fighting game-ass challenge battles at this juncture, asking you to do things like accrue a certain combo or win fights using specific kinds of juggles. That's confidence, man. They knew their combat system kicked ass, and anyone who finds themselves agreeing will have a lot of fun with these. I spent a lot of this video gushing about that combat, and that's because I do sincerely believe it to be great. It's become one of my favourite combat systems in any JRPG I've ever played, and if any of this sounded even remotely interesting to you, then I highly recommend you pick up From the New World and give it a try. At the very least, I guarantee you won't have played another RPG quite like it. You don't need to have played the other Shadow Hearts games to do so, although I do also recommend them. They're all good games and worth playing for their own merits, and this series in general has ended up becoming a pet favourite of mine. Everyone's got that one kind of semi-obscure JRPG series they go feral for, and I've decided mine is Shadow Hearts, so please do consider checking them out. So what now? Where did this series go from here? Well, sadly, this is the part of the video where I say that despite my overall positivity on From the New World, it was the last game in its series, with it apparently not selling well enough to justify future installments. Which is obviously a tragedy since they were cooking with this one, but despite this, now is actually a pretty good time to get into Shadow Hearts because a spiritual successor, Pennyblood, was funded on Kickstarter a little while back with its release planned for 2025. There hasn't been a whole lot shown of it yet, but if it's as much fun to play as New World, then us horror RPG fans will be eating good. Maybe we can take a look at it when the time comes, but for now, I think I'll leave it there. Cheers for watching. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Just wanted to make a little thing about a game I enjoyed playing recently, particularly since the last time I made a video about a JRPG it was largely making fun of it, so I wanted to make one about an offbeat game I actually really liked instead. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to the channel and supporting on the Patreon. Last video I said that I went part-time at my job, and so I'm now partially reliant on income from my content creator shenanigans to make the ends meet, and I'm currently a couple of months into that, and so far, it's working out fine. Thank you very much to everyone who supports me in these endeavors. But before I sign off, I wanted to add that if you do support on Patreon or are subscribed on Twitch, you gain access to the supporter channel on my Discord, which I originally intended to be a direct line of communication between me and my audience, you know, post some updates and teasers and what have you for what I'm working on. But what's actually ended up happening over there is it's become a channel for people posting photos of their cats, and, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So this time I'd like to introduce you to a couple of the cats of the Punchy Discord. This is Phoebe, posted by Mallow, an extremely photogenic cat that constantly looks like she's plotting some kind of evil scheme. At this point she is more popular in my own Discord than I am, so it's only a matter of time before this channel belongs to her, so watch out for that. And this is Zelda, posted by B, a cat that constantly looks half asleep and seems to drool a lot, which has led most of the Discord referring to her as Wet Beast. All of this and more cats can be yours via the Patreon, so once again, check that out if you're interested, and thank you very much for enjoying the videos. See you next time!